This is Marie McCabe doing an interview for Historic Madison on March 27th, 1984, and I'm interviewing L.J. Markwardt. Mr. Markwardt, will you give me your full name and how you spell it?
Well, my full name is Lorraine Joseph Markwardt, and that name was given to me by my aunt many years ago. I was born in Lansing, Iowa, November 26, 1889. Now I've been 56 times. But I don't use my full name because I often get letters addressed to Miss Lorraine Markwardt. So over the years I've merely used my initials, L.J. Markwardt, and that name I use on my Social Security and all my other transactions in my bank accounts and all my records.
And that's spelled M-A-R-K?
Yeah, my name is spelled L-O-R-R-A-I-N-E, J-O-S-E-P-H, M-A-R-K-W-A-R-D-T, Lorraine Joseph Markwardt.
And how did you happen to come to Madison?
Well, that's an interesting story. I attended the high school at Lansing, Iowa, and the high school there had just established the new four-year course. It had been a 3-year high school, and I was privileged in the first class of 1906 to take the 4-year course. I decided that I would like to have some further education, and I wasn't sure where we might want to go, but a friend of mine in Lansing had attended summer school at the University of Wisconsin. He was a teacher, and he sung the praises of Wisconsin, and it happened that Wisconsin was a little bit nearer to Lansing, Iowa, on the Mississippi River, where I was born, that we and a friend of mine decided to come to the University of Wisconsin at Madison. We arrived here in 1908, and we wore big bowler hats, believe it or not, as we came to the university city here and found a place to stay. We reported to the YWCA, and a friend there we met took us around and found us a place to stay. So we obtained lodging at Bruin Street. Yeah, it was 10 North Bruin Street. That's where the hospital is now located. And I lived there for the full 4 years during my attendance at the university, and after that for some time with the Cooper family at that address.
Do you remember what the tuition was?
Yes, I happened to have to pay an out-of-state tuition, and I paid the horrendous price of $25 a semester. And that would be unbelievable in the present day here. So after some 2 years, I applied for remission of the out-of-state tuition, and that was granted, and I was able to attend then without paying any additional tuition. That was in 1908 when I arrived here.
And how big was the city then?
The city was maybe 15 to 20,000, and I've seen it grow up to nearly 200,000 during the years I've been here.
Did the campus extend, or the city extend much beyond Breeze Terrace then?
No, the city was confined pretty much east of Breeze Terrace. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time Professor Skinner was the president of the school board, and they decided to locate West High School way out on Regent Street. And he was criticized no end for being so crude as to move a school that far away from the city. But you can see how wrong people were over the time as you see how the city has grown. That was Professor Skinner, whom I knew personally and whom I saw quite often.
About how big was the university then?
The university was about 5 to 8,000 something in that order.
And
I came and attended the engineering college at the university. I decided I'd like to be an engineer in a very peculiar manner. When I was at my hometown of Lansing, Iowa, a water system was being put in, and some of the engineers came with transits and levels and laid out the plan. And I thought, well, gee, that would be wonderful to have an occupation like that where you'd have the privilege of doing constructive things. So I decided from that incident to become an engineer. So it's interesting how sometimes small events change one's whole future in life.
Where were your classes held in engineering?
They were held in the old engineering building near the lake. And that building is now used for education, I think. But the new College of Engineering location was not located at that time. Dean Tenor was head of the engineering college, and I got to know all of the faculty quite well.
Who were some of the other professors?
Well, I can remember many of them because they remembered me. One of the professors was Dean Millar. He was in charge of descriptive geometry and drafting, and Professor Phillips was head of the department. And you know, it's important how impressions are left with the people with whom you come in contact, because Dean Millar never forgot me, and we became close friends even after I left the university. And he remembered me when he had a vacancy in the department, invited me to come as assistant. And I was working at the Forest Products Laboratory at the time, and then I resigned and accepted the position with Dean Millar. And I was instrumental in working with him in the preparation of a book on descriptive geometry. And I assisted in that, and that was published and used in 30 or 40 different universities around the country, and we received royalties on that textbook. I knew Professor Kinney, who designed the field house down here. I knew Professor Van Hagen, who was in charge of railroad engineering, which was an important subject at that time. Excuse me. And I knew Professor Maurer, who was in charge of the mechanics at the university. And I knew Professor M.O. Withy, who worked in the mechanics department. So I was well acquainted with many of the university faculty, all of whom have since passed away.
Did you take courses in other subjects such as English and
well, they were included in the regular engineering curriculum.
Yes.
We had English and foreign language and those things outside of the engineering college to give a broader education.
So you had classes in other buildings?
Yeah, so we had classes in many other buildings there as we moved around. I remember Professor Morgan, who taught German. I remember Professor Schlichter, under whom I took some mathematics. He was the famed mathematician, and he had some number of famous sons that also grew into prominence. And I knew Professor H.W. March, who was a specialist in the field of mathematics and the theory of elasticity. And I later hired Professor March to work with us on some of our research work at the Forest Products Laboratory. So that's a sample of the many things we do. One of the other professors I remember well was Professor E. Parker, who was in charge of structural design at the engineering college. And when it came into my senior year, he was appointed city engineer. And again, it's a case of leaving favorable memories. And he remembered me and asked me to be his assistant city engineer. So I accepted, and I left the university a little before graduation time by permission of the faculty to become assistant city engineer under E. Parker. So I worked for nearly a year as assistant city engineer until I left and joined the United States Forest Products Laboratory.
Let me go back a little bit to ask who your parents were and what your father did and how you were able to go to away to college.
Well, my parents were of German descent, but they were born in the United States. And my father at one time worked on a farm, but later he once had a store. And I remember as a youngster of the store catching fire and watching the fire from a neighbor's place. So we lost our store there, but he then became manager of the city scales department and then later manager of the lumber yard. So he was an expert in lumber and also an expert craftsman. He was a carpenter, and he made many boats that were used on the Mississippi River. I used a number of them when I was a youngster there on the river, and we spent a lot of time earning money to go to the university by clamming, as they call it. It's catching these mussels and cleaning them and selling the shells for button purposes.
Had your father had a college education?
No, he didn't, but he taught school, but he didn't have a college education.
And what was his full name?
Joseph Frederick Markwardt.
Mm-hmm. And your mother's?
So I got a second name from my father.
Mm-hmm. What was your mother's name?
My mother's Louisa Besh Markwardt.
Besh?
She was born in Boscobel, Wisconsin.
Oh. Mm-hmm. And what was her background?
Well, she lived there with her folks, and then she became married and lived in Lansing as a housewife there. Mm-hmm. So my parents were both wonderful people, and I only regret that we didn't have cassette tapes at that time, so I could have recorded many of the experiences that have long since, and I've often longed that I could have had more time with them and known more about them, because they were really wonderful people, and you begin to appreciate it more as the time goes along.
How do you spell your mother's maiden name?
Besch, Besch.
From Boscobel.
From Boscobel, that's okay. Right, yes.
And had she gone to school?
Yes, she attended in Boscobel.
Mm-hmm. But not university?
Not the university.
I see.
No, neither of my parents attended the university.
But they saw the value of it.
Yes, that's right.
Son.
And they helped me go through. I only had one sister, and she also knew the value of education, so she went to Denver and to Greeley, Colorado, and attended the teachers' school there. And she obtained a degree and then became a teacher in Denver, where she taught for many, many years in the school system there.
And what was her name?
Her name was Alma Markwardt.
Mm-hmm. Did she marry?
She later married a Mr. Ellermeyer. He was a lawyer, and an outdoorsman and a wonderful person in many ways. He taught youngsters in Boy Scouting and taught them how to live in the mountains. And he was an expert craftsman. And he left me some memorabilia that I have on display over here from this lapidary work he has done, where he's made a lot of valuable stones and exhibits. And I inherited the whole collection that I have here that I'd like to leave, if I could, to the Elvium Art Center, because I think it's worthwhile.
Did you go home summers when you were at
Yes,
the
I used to go home summers.
Did
and
you work?
At times I used to work there. I worked in the button factory for quite a while. I stayed out of school a year before I came to the university to earn money, so I'd be in a better position. But I think it served another purpose. It added in affording a little more maturity for a student entering the university. But in Lansing, as I said, I had been doing a lot of clamming and catching these shells, but there were 3 button factories in Lansing that converted these shells into buttons. So I worked during one summer, and at other times in the year when I wasn't in between school, and in the button factory cutting buttons, which are later finished and polished into the buttons that people used.
Did you work then at all during the year while you were at the university, or you didn't have to work for your board and room or anything?
Well, I didn't, but I tried to get some, but I wasn't successful in finding a place.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a boarding place right near where I lived with the Worthington family on Charter Street, and we had a great relationship there with them and those people, and I became acquainted with the Worthingtons and still have know many of them. In fact, one of the Worthington families living now is my nephew, because his father, where we used to board, married my wife's sister.
Do you know what you paid for do you remember what meals cost?
Oh, about 3.5 a week, as I remember it. And our board, I don't remember our board, but it was relatively cheap.
Mm-hmm.
But things were quite reasonable in that day,
Oh, yes.
and one could really go through the university on a song, because it only cost me, and I was very economical because we didn't have a great deal of wealth. It only cost me about $400 or $500 a year to attend the university, and that wouldn't get to first base under present conditions here.
Did you take part in any sports activities?
Well, I did not very much, because I came here from a school that I found wasn't accredited, and the only way we got into the university was on probation. In other words, when we signed up, we didn't get the full registration permission, but on probation. So we had to make good. And on that account, and I think it was one of the best things that could happen to any person, was to have a must of performance. And for that reason, I devoted myself aggressively to the educational process.
Did you go to any of the football games or
Oh, yes.
whatever?
I always enjoyed sports. I used to play baseball when I was over at Lansing, Iowa, and we had a semi-professional team that went around and played. And I was thinking of joining the baseball team here, but I never did fully join them. But I always liked sports and attended football, and I think I have one of the longest football attendance records here, because I've attended continuously from 1908 up to 1984, So
That's remarkable.
I don't think there are many people that have a longer attendance.
I don't think
There used to be coupon books that students would get and use, and when I was at the Forest Products Lab, we were able to acquire those books and use them ourselves. But now we're back on the full ticket basis, but I still go every year.
Were the games over here at Breeze Terrace?
Yeah, I remember the old games were down at down near Charter Street there in that area, and they had a stadium there. And one of the games I attended when I think Keki Mall was one of the players, it was after a rain, and they had some temporary bleachers, and the bleachers collapsed while the game was on. So I was one of the bleachers that collapsed, and it worked out that I didn't get injured, but a few people did. But the stadium stand just folded up, and I lifted my feet up and just gradually sunk down to the ground level. That was one of the experiences that is kind of unforgettable.
Who was the president of the university?
Charles Richard Van Hise was president, was at the time. I got to know him quite well, and he was a great conservationist, and I think it was largely on his account that the U.S. Forest Products Laboratory was located in Madison. The United States Forest Service had research centers in a number of different cities. There was one at Yale University and one at Washington University in St. Louis, one at Atlanta, one at Seattle, Washington, one at Denver. So they were quite dispersed and not unified. But someone received the idea, McGarvey Klein, that it would be wonderful to have a combined institution. So they conceived the idea and sold the idea to Gifford Pinchot, who was the chief forester of the United States. And they had ideas but no money. So they wrote to a number of different universities to ask if they would be willing to cooperate in establishing a forest products research organization at their institutions. There also had been some at Purdue University with William Kendrick Hatt as the head. And Charles Richard Van Hise was very receptive and had a broad view of the importance and significance of the national forest, and the university here accepted the proposal, and they furnished a building on University Avenue that was constructed just for that purpose in 1909, and by that token, the university accepted the Forest Products Laboratory site. They provided them a building and power, and then cooperation of the university in its operations. The present building is still standing, the original building, I mean, and it's now occupied by the mining department of the university. It was on University Avenue. I happened to be in the university at the time the laboratory was started, and it was, as you know, the location on University Avenue near the railroad crossing there was not far from my home on Bruin Street. So as we roamed around, I got acquainted with the work that was going on and learned of the construction of the laboratory, and spent some time around there and got to know a number of the employees when they were moved in here, some in 1909. And then the laboratory was started and dedicated in 1910.
What? How do you spell the name of that street? I can't picture what that is.
It's Bruen, Bruin Street
Bruin
is where I
Street.
lived.
Oh.
And it
Wasn't-
no longer exists because
Oh.
the University Hospital is on the site.
I see. Well, yes, that would be quite close to Charter then, and
Yeah,
between
yeah.
Charter and
Yeah.
Randall.
Well, then I most of my career was spent at the Forest Laboratory just because of that introduction I learned when I was in the university.
Well, let's get back for a minute to while you were still in the university. Did you take part in any of the water sports? Did you
Well,
use the lake at all?
Well, at that lake, the lake was Mendota was very important because at that time they had hazing, and the freshmen were all hazed, and then the freshmen all wore those little green caps, and I was one of them, and I was hazed at one time and then dumped into the lake along with a number of others. But that was one of the things that took place in the early days at the university before they got rid of the hazing.
You didn't belong to a fraternity, did
No,
you?
I didn't. No, I never
Did you
belonged
have
to
any
a fraternity. In fact,
groups?
I don't think I could have afforded because I was coming more or less on my own with money I'd earned during the year I was out of school and so on.
Did you? What did I just ask? I forgot. Forgotten that question. Well, did you belong to any social groups? Did you go to church groups or
Well,
who were your friends?
my friends were largely university faculty people. I got to know them so well. And Dean Millar belonged to one of the clubs and one of the oldest social groups in the city. It's known as the University West End Club. And it's still in existence and going strong. And I became a member of that way back in the 1900s, or rather around 1917, somewhere around there. And the club used to meet at homes, and they'd have a dinner at the homes and then have a program. And I remember some of these at different homes, like Dean Millar's home. But I've been a member of that ever since, and I think probably the oldest member in the group. They've been meeting now recently. They quit meeting at homes quite a while ago and met at the YMCA for a long time. Then they moved at other meeting places, and now they've been meeting at the Cuba Club. But just now, they're starting to meet down at Howard Johnson's. But the club is still in existence and one of the oldest clubs. I was secretary at one time and produced the minutes, and the minutes of the club are put on file in the Historical Society. That was one of the principal social groups at that time. Of course, there were bowling groups and other things like that. I started to bowl with the Forest Products Laboratory League in 1917, and I'm still bowling with them because I don't know enough to quit.
Where was that bowling alley?
Well,
then?
we had different alleys. We met at Middleton Sports Bowl at one time.
In 1917?
Yeah, well, I don't know just what year. And then we used to bowl down at the park bowling alleys down on the Capitol Square where the Wolf Kubley building is. That used to be a bowling alley right there, and we bowled there for a long time. And there was another bowling league, the Faculty Bowling League. And then many of the professors belonged, and I was with that league too. So there we bowled there at the park alleys also for a long time. Then they moved down to some alleys on, then I bowled with the Rotary Club later, but we bowled with some alleys on Wilson Street. And then finally the Forest Products Laboratory group has been meeting out at the Eagles Lodge Club.
Did you go out with girls?
Well, not very much. I didn't have much time to enjoy facilities.
I wondered if you went
I
to...
did go to a few dances with some of the ladies there, but not many.
How about movies?
Well, we used to see movies quite often, and then there used to be vaudeville shows down at the theaters on South.
Not Monona.
Monona Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And they were located there. We used to attend them regularly, and we enjoyed the shows a great deal. But that was one of the features in the early days. The students used to go. And then there used to be the Foley Opera House on Mifflin Street. And that was the one that fully had many shows there. And there used to be, excuse me, there used to be a loft in the theater there, and students would line up and get in for a quarter to attend to see the shows. I remember many of them there that we attended and took in.
They had some famous stars, didn't they? Some
Yeah.
well-known
Yes, well-known theaters, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then we used to have exams regularly, of course, and we were so up to date, and my friend and I, because we were very studious and kept up and never got behind on our studies. And the night before a big examination, we'd often go out to a movie or something like that to relax instead of trying to cram, and like many students did. But that was quite a different life than...
What did the movies cost then?
Like
What did they cost?
the shows,
Mm-hmm.
we paid a quarter to get up in the loft there. And I forgot what the vaudeville shows were, but maybe 50 cents, something around that. So they weren't expensive, so that was a luxury we had without adding much cost.
Did you always walk?
Yes, we always walked everywhere. I used to be one of the best walkers, but I can't walk so well anymore. There used to be streetcars in Madison when we came here, and we came into the Northwestern Depot there from La Crosse, going up from Lansing to La Crosse, and then coming in, and then we walked pretty much everywhere we went, but we did use streetcars from some time. Streetcars ran out from down on the east side, past the railroad stations, and up and down University Avenue here, and out on the west side here along Breeze Terrace, and out to
The cemetery, didn't
yeah,
they?
and there was still a bridge that was used by the old streetcars on Harrison Street, where they used to cross over from the south side of the railroad tracks to the north side. And the bridge is still there, but not used.
I heard that President Van Hise had a horse.
Yeah, I think he did, but I'm not too familiar with that. But he was a wonderful person. And
I heard that he rode his horse to the football games.
Well, it could be,
Remember
but
that?
I didn't remember that.
But there were quite a few horses on the streets.
Yes, that's right. Oh, they had horse cars at one time. The horses were pulling the streetcars.
Oh.
And then the electricity came in and replaced the horses. So those were the transitions that took place over the years.
There weren't very many cars, I presume.
No
when you
automobiles.
came.
The earliest automobile was about 1912, as I remembered. And there were very few of them at that time. They were kind of a rarity.
Well, then they really didn't need to clear the streets of the snow.
No,
There weren't cars.
No, not with autos there, no.
Just for the streetcars.
But for many years they cleared the sidewalks with the university snowplow. They had a horse plow, and every every time it snowed, they'd drive around all of the streets in the University District and plow off the snow.
And,
And everybody's lot, regardless, they'd just go up and down the block.
I suppose they had to clear on the campus, too.
Yes, and they cleared the campus that way.
Well, there were pretty severe winters.
Yes,
back there.
yeah, it was pretty clear. I wasn't too well equipped with clothing, and I didn't even have an overcoat when I was here. And Dean Millar became worried about it being so cold without my being adequately clothed, but I lived through it anyway.
Were there quite a few girls on the campus?
Oh yes, there were many of them there. Yeah, it was coeducational, and there were many girls. I didn't know so many of them, and there weren't many of them that took engineering like there are now. So I didn't have a chance to get too much acquainted with them.
Where did you go to register when you came?
Well, up to Main Hall.
Oh.
And then the Burschar's office was down at the corner of Park there and State Street. And we used to pay our dues and our fees there.
There was a small administration
Yeah,
building.
small center there, yes.
And I guess the president's house was over on...
Yeah, it was on
Langdon?
Lathrop Street, or on
Langdon. Langdon?
Langdon Street, yes. Well, I got to know the city pretty well through my service as assistant city engineer after I left the university.
What was the graduation like services of the university?
Well, they were quite formal affairs there, and there were cap and gowns just as there are now.
Where was it held? The
Well,
commencement?
I can't remember just where they were held.
In the field, was there a field house then?
Yes, the field house was, I forgot when it was put up, but it was designed by Professor Kinney.
Oh. So what, did you have a job then right after graduation?
Oh, that's one of the things that I will never forget, is the importance of leaving a good impression with people. And even before I left the university, Professor E. Parker had asked me to be his assistant, as assistant city engineer. He was my professor at the university, and he remembered me well. That's just the same as Professor Millar did when he invited me to be his assistant. So it pays to leave a good record. I learned that, and I like to promote the idea that it never pays to loaf, and it pays to be dependable, and it paid dividends very often that way. So I was.
You went right to work then, immediately?
Yes, I went to work immediately, but I got acquainted with the Forest Products Laboratory, and then just to have another axe in the fire, another iron in the fire, I decided to take an examination for the laboratory as an engineer in their research work on the properties of wood. And when I was a senior, an examination was given, and I registered for that and took it. Today when you take a civil service job, all you do is fill out a form and tell them how good you are.
Mm-hmm.
But back in those days, we had to take an examination and prove how good we were. Well, I took the examination, and we not only was given, but it lasted 3 days. We had one day in studying mechanics. We had another one in mathematics. We had another one in drawing and machine design. And we had another one in drafting. And I'll never forget one of the problems that was given me in the examination, and that was design a 10 horsepower vertical boiler. and that was to a student just out of school. Well, I'd never designed a vertical boiler, but I knew all the formulas for the strength of rivets and the thickness of and the amount of steam required, and also I designed a 10 horsepower vertical boiler in the examination. And I passed the examination with flying colors. I got 90-some in mathematics and mechanics, and I got an overall report of 89 because I only got 75 on experience.
Oh.
But all my other marks were higher. Well,
So,
that's the extra thing in, and you know, the same year I graduated, I received a letter from them inviting me to join the Forest Products Laboratory staff in the engineer and the timber mechanics department, and I accepted and then left my job as assistant city engineer. And I stayed there until I got the invitation from Dean Millar to be his assistant in teaching. It's always fun to work with young people in teaching because it tends to keep you young, and it's a privilege to share time with them in their activities.
How long were you with the Forest Products Lab then?
Well, I was with them for 1912 to 1914, and then I left and went to university, and when the war came out in 1917, I was invited back to the Forest Products Laboratory, and I accepted and went back and carried on war work for many, many years, through World War I and World War II. And I spent 46 years with the Forest Products Laboratory, the principal part of my professional career.
What would the Forest Products Laboratory war work be?
Well, we worked on many of the things. We worked on wood airplanes quite a bit, studied the properties of different woods and got alternate woods that they could use for longerons and different purposes. We carried on some studies of the design of aircraft wing ribs that are used to form the wings. And then in shipbuilding, we worked on woods for some of the minesweeper fleets that had to be made of wood. So there were no end of problems that way that we carried on. Another big department of work was on packaging. You know, the material you get in order is no good unless it reaches the end in a satisfactory condition. So we had done some work on packaging of local materials and so on. But when the war came on, we found out that their packaging was very inadequate, and we put on special studies for packaging some of their particular goods, their ammunition and so on. So we provided for protection of shipment of arms and so on, so they'd be ready to use when they were opened and put in service.
Where did you live after you left the university as a student?
Well, I stayed at 12 Bruin Street there for a long time,
Oh.
and till I got married, and then I moved in an apartment. I got married in 1917 to a wonderful woman, and we had 57 years together.
How did you meet her?
Well, I met her through George Worthington, because she was a sister of the lady that George Worthington was going, and he married Irene Worthington, and Irene Starks it was, and her sister was Lula Starks, whom I married. So that's how I met him, through my acquaintance at her dining place.
Was she a Madison girl?
Yes, she was a Madison girl. She'd lived here all her life. Her folks were quite famous too. Mr. N.O. Starks worked with the Johnson Company in designing farm equipment and machinery, and he had many patents on improvements in farm machinery. So he was well known.
Is that S-T-A-R-K-S?
S-T-A-R-K-S, yes.
Was the Johnson Company the same as Gisholt?
Yeah, they had machine works there. And then he was also affiliated in some way with Gissel, but I don't know just the details of that. But he was a very capable person there.
I see.
But he passed away in 1908, I think it was.
So you you were married here in Madison?
Yes,
Whereabouts?
we were married in their house.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Where was that?
That was on Spate Street.
Uh-huh. On the east
Yeah,
side.
yeah, 412 Spate Street, I remember. And the wedding took place there, and we had a Lutheran pastor give us the ceremony. But my wife had been a Lutheran, but she changed over to a Presbyterian where I was, so we both joined the Presbyterian Church.
The one near the square?
That's Christ Presbyterian Church, yeah.
Oh, yes, uh-huh.
And George Hunt was the pastor at
Oh,
the
sure.
time.
Uh-huh.
And I got to know him exceedingly well. We became very close friends, and I was one of his most trusted lieutenants, and I served on the Board of Elders for many years under George Hunt.
You didn't go to Christian Endeavor or whatever it was called while you were at the university, though.
What?
Did you go to the church young people's group when you were in the university?
No,
You didn't.
not much, no.
But
we
afterwards.
attended, though, but we didn't. There used to be a Matthew Allison that was in the University Presbyterian Center there on State Street. And he was a wonderful person, so versed in the Bible there. And we used to love to attend his services and lectures there. Matthew G. Allison, I still remember the name.
So where was your apartment then after you were married?
We right across the street here at 12 Lathrop Street. We lived in this apartment right next door, just north of us,
Oh.
right here.
Oh,
And we had an apartment there for several years until, well, not very long, until we bought this house.
I
The-
see.
A person by the name of Johnson had lived here, and he was moving to Washington and sold the house. And we looked at it and bought it, so we moved into the house here, so we didn't have much apartment life.
It's a pretty big house, isn't it?
Yeah,
Or,
well, I still live here, and I ramble around in it. and I got a lovely office here and a recreation center. We used to play cards down here at times and have coffee. And then I got 3 bedrooms upstairs and an office. And I got a main floor up here, so I got pretty enough room to get around in since I'm all alone here.
What year was that you bought the house?
1918, I think it was, or thereabouts.
And
said-
had you saved enough money to buy a house?
Well, we had to.
Okay, this is side 2 of L.J. Markwart's.
Well, we bought the house with a mortgage and with a down payment, and later we were able to pay off the mortgage. I'd saved some money enough for a down payment, so we were glad to get into a house here by ourselves. I've forgotten the exact amount we paid, but it was relatively reasonable according to today's prices. I think it may have been in the early thousands is all, whereas today the house here is listed at $84,000, so it's grown in value that much since we've been living here.
You didn't have a car then, did you?
No, but I had my first car in 1917.
Oh, you did.
I remember buying one. I bought a second-hand Maxwell. And it was all right for a while, but it finally went to pieces.
First car my dad had.
Yeah. So I've driven a car ever since 1917.
But you were able to walk to work.
Oh, yes, I was one of the best walkers in the town. As a matter of fact, when I went west one year, in 1914, I went west with Professor Phillips of the university, and I went with him. I'd saved a little money. I earned $1,000 a year teaching at the university, and I was able to save money on that and went west. So I went with him to the Yosemite National Park. And I'll never forget climbing up to the top of Yosemite Falls and up all around the park there, and there was no trouble at all. And then we attended the World's Fair at San Francisco in that year, and the Presidio, and I stayed there in some of the events during the fair.
Did you drive out in a car?
No, we went by train.
Oh, uh-huh.
Trains were the mode of travel at that time, and cars weren't too dependable in a way. The tires weren't up to the standard they are now, and roads weren't in the condition either that were amenable to good driving conditions.
Well, where did you do your shopping when you lived out in this neighborhood?
My what?
Shopping. Yes, where did your wife get groceries and?
Oh yeah, we used to use this. Well, there was some stores just in the neighborhood. We did all the neighborhood shopping. But you asked about walking, and one year I went out to the Grand Canyon, and I ventured with some trepidation to walk down the Bright Angel Trail. And I walked all the way down the Bright Angel Trail to the river and washed my feet in the river and had lunch down there and then walked all the way back. So walking was no problem at all, but today I have trouble getting around as well as I should.
Well, I suppose the grocery stores delivered in those days.
Yes, they did deliver at that time.
Mm-hmm.
They had a delivery service, but I think we always pretty much depended on shopping ourselves there at the different stores.
Was there on Monroe Street? Were there some stores there?
Yes, they were just coming in, but there were some on Regent Street here too, out near Allen Street. There was a good grocery store at the corner there.
And did you have a family?
No, we never had any children, so we don't have any survivors here. I'm the last leaf on the tree. And old Oliver Wendell Holmes, he wrote a poem about me one time. He didn't know it, but 100 years he wrote a poem about me called The Last Leaf. He says, I saw him once before as he passed by the door, and again the pavement stones resound as he totters o'er the ground with his cane. They say that in his prime, ere the pruning knife of time cut him down, not a better man was found by the crier on his round through the town. But now he walks the streets and he looks at all he meets sad and wan, and he shakes his feeble head and it seems as if he said, they are gone. The mossy marbles rest on the lips that he has pressed in their bloom, and the names he loved to hear have been carved for many a year on the tomb. My grandmama once said, poor old lady, she is dead long ago, that he had a Roman nose and his cheek was like a rose in the snow. But now his nose is thin and hangs upon his chin like a staff, and a crook is in his back, and a melancholy crack in his laugh. I know it's a sin for me to sit and grin at him here, but the old three-cornered hat, the breeches and all that, were so queer, and if I should live to be the last leaf on the tree in the spring, let them laugh as I do now at the old forsaken bough where I cling, says Oliver Wendell Holmes.
Well, I don't
So
think...
he wrote a poem about me.
Oh, I don't think you've gotten to that state yet.
Well, I always liked poetry. That's been one of my hobbies here.
Oh.
And I don't know where I learned it, but I remember in school one time, about 75 years ago, I was given a poem to learn and recite like they do sometimes here. And I I still remember after 75 years a few of the lines here. And the piece I didn't admire too much, but I think I must, with shaking knees, have delivered it. But it was Woods in Winter by Longfellow. And he says, when winter winds are piercing chill and through the hawthorn blows the gale, with solemn feet I tread the hill that overbrows the lonely vale. O'er the bare upland and way through the long reach of desert woods, the embracing sunbeams chastely play and gladden these deep solitudes. Where twisted round the barren oak the summer vine and beauty clung, the summer winds the stillness broke, the crystal icicles hung. I still remember that when I delivered it and back 75 years ago in high school, or before high school. And I learned a lot of others here I never forgotten here, like the One Horse Shay by Oliver Wendell Holmes, and by Thanatopsis by William Cullen Bryant. I can recite every word of that. And then the Cremation of Sam McGee by Robert Service and The Spell of the Yukon. So I got quite a repertoire of things that I have learned and can recite without any trouble.
Do you ever entertain the Rotary Club with those?
Well, every birthday at Rotary Club, I've been a Rotarian for over 50 years. And I became a Rotarian because I was playing golf one day with Professor Matthews of the chemistry department of the university. He was in charge of the chemistry, and he and I were playing golf together, and he was president of the Rotary Club and said, would you like to be join Rotary Club? Well, I jumped at the idea because I'd been invited to join other clubs, and I waited for an opportunity to be a Rotarian where some of my other friends were. So now when I was president of the club in the 1950 period, I used to often quote a little verse or something there to open the meetings. But now every year at my birthday, I give them a little dissertation on some of my things that I have learned that year. Last birthday, I took the time out. They have the birthday boys at the head table. I took the time out to recite the One Horse Shay or by Oliver Wendell Holmes, or the Deacon's Masterpiece. And I've never forgotten that, and I could repeat it at Drop's Hat. Next year I'm going to recite the Cremation of Sam McGee. So every year I give them a different piece there. Well, and you know, it's surprising. The audience gets up and claps and gives me a hand. So that's one hobby I've enjoyed, and it's come in to be very helpful on many occasions when you're giving a speech and you can cite some quotation or thing.
Well, what did you and your wife do for entertainment?
Well, we went to movies and we went to shows, and we attended clubs like the University West End Club. So we had quite a bit, and then we had many social groups among our colleagues.
I suppose.
We had a group that played cards once a month, and we'd have a dinner and played bridge. And that was some of the things that we did there to pass the time. I did a lot of travel, and I was a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and I attended many international conferences. I was in Europe 9 different times, and over a period of 25 years, I was the United States ambassador to the United Nations Force Technology Group. And we had meetings in Geneva, Switzerland, and we had meetings in Eagles, Austria. We had meetings in Madrid, Spain. We had meetings in Paris. And I was the U.S. delegate to all of those things. So they called me at the laboratory the ambassador of forest products.
What was your job there, your title?
Well, I was an engineer, and I started as assistant engineer in the division of wood engineering, and we covered all phases of timber design and studies on the strength of woods. And I wrote many bulletins, and one of them on the strength and related properties of woods grown in the United States, with a complete documentation of the properties of 164 different woods. And then I wrote another bulletin on the properties of woods grown in Alaska. I was sent up there in 1922 to collect timbers from the Chugach and the Tongass National Forests, which I did. And then the timbers were shipped here, and we tested them and studied them, and I wrote a thick bulletin, a copy of which I have in the desk right here, on the properties of Alaskan woods. And then I took my vacation up there. And in my vacation, I saw a lot of Alaska. I went up the Alaska Railroad to Fairbanks, and I took a tramp steamer down the Tanana River to Tanana, and then caught an Alaska steamer, stern wheel steamer like we had on the Mississippi River, up the Yukon River to Whitehorse. And that was an interesting experience, and we stopped overnight at the town of Eagle, which was the border town between United States and Canada. And when our boat was stopped there overnight, we had the most wonderful display of northern lights. Everything around the sky was just brilliant and bright and blazing, and it's almost impossible to describe, except a fellow by the name of Robert Service learned how to describe it. In his book and poem on the Ballad of the Northern Lights, he says, "And the skies of night were alive with light, with a throbbing, thrilling flame. Amber and rose and violet, opal and gold it came. It swept the sky like a giant scythe. It quivered back to a wedge. Argently bright it cleft the night with a wavy golden edge. Pennants of silver waved and streamed, lazy banners unfurled. Sudden splendors of sabers gleamed, lightning javelins were hurled. And there in our awe we gazed, and I saw with their wild uplifted eyes charge and retire the hosts of fire in the battlefield of the skies, as Robert Service more colorfully describes it."
Your wife went with you?
No,
said?
that was, she stayed home,
I see.
and I went alone there.
Did you
But I remember I went up in July, and at midnight in July you could read a newspaper up there without any light. So it was a time of the midnight sun. But I stopped at Dawson on the way and saw the gold dredging and visited Robert Service's cabin where he wrote all his poems, and then came home. So we saw a whole lot of Alaska that I'd never forgotten. I've written a story about that was published in the Wisconsin Engineering Journal. And I read it the other day, and it doesn't sound half bad for being written 50 years ago.
Oh, I bet. Well, did you have a summer cottage?
No, we never had
Quite
one.
a few people did, though, didn't
Yes,
they?
but my wife's folks and relatives had a cottage down at Lake Wabisa. And we used to go down there at times and visit and carry on there.
And by this time you had a car.
Beg pardon?
You had a car?
Yes, I had a car in 1917 from then on.
Well, what was the next one you got?
My next car?
Mm-hmm.
I've forgotten, but I had a lot of Chryslers more than any of the other cars at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we used to go down there quite often. I remember one time when, before I had a car even, I walked all the way up to Madison to work from Lake Wabisa.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so we used to stay down there, and that's the way I got got up here at times.
When was the new building built for Forest Products?
The new one was built in
31.
1931, yeah. He knows because Bernie Adler, my friend here, worked on the building when it was constructed by the Fritz Company, and he was one of the workers that was engaged in building it. So that was built in 1931 here, and it's been a wonderful building ever since.
And you moved then
Yes,
out
we
there
moved that, but during the war, we expanded our force so much we had to move into different buildings. That was before the new building here in World War I. So we moved in to half a dozen different university buildings, the agricultural engineering and some of the other buildings to get additional space. So we had our whole division set up in some of the barracks buildings down there along the railroad tracks, where we carried on our research on strength and properties of wood.
Well, by the 1920s, after the war, the city had grown quite a bit.
Yes,
hadn't
it was continued to grow because it was a healthy city there, and the university continued to grow and get larger and larger. And I think the costs began to go up and up. So I often think that when I went through there, I got through on a string in a way.
Well, do you remember the Prohibition years? Prohibition?
Oh yes, yeah, that was one of the issues there. And I remember some of the problems about how near the taverns and saloons could be to the university. And I remember some of the campaigns by faculty members to try to extend the distance and keep them out a little farther. Dean Millar was one of the activists in that program.
I suppose you remember when Lindbergh made his first flight.
Yes, very well. He attended the university here, but I didn't. He was later than I was, so I didn't happen to know him.
But the Forest Products was
Forest Products was here and going.
Influential in that kidnapping.
Yes, that's
of course,
right.
That was later.
Well,
it?
I'm the only one left that worked on the program. We got involved because it involved wood that was used in the ladder. And Mr. Kaler, one of the members of the Forest Products staff, a specialist in wood identification and botany, spent full time on it for a number of months. And he did a remarkable job in tracing the origin of the lumber that was used in the ladder. There's 60,000 sawmills in the United States, and he was able to locate the exact sawmill where that lumber was produced. And that was one of the extremely remarkable jobs that was done. And it all resulted because there was a little defect in the plating of the lumber. There was a nick in one of the blades of the planer, and that showed up on every 8th turn of the planer. And that identified the planer, and it had a special speed, and that helped them locate the mill in the south where that lumber was produced and set up to the Brooklyn lumber yard where Hauptmann picked it up. And I worked with Kaler on the case. We made a model of the ladder, and I tested it. And we analyzed the results, but it was a poorly made ladder and has the cross grain in it, and it broke. So we had a lot of association there. But Kaler was able to take samples of the wood from the attic of his house and show that the lumber used in the ladder was taken, some of it, from the attic of his house. And the nail marks exactly fit the nail marks in the attic. So there, and then the growth rate and all the fingerprint identification features of wood all rounded up, so there was no question about where the lumber came from and who made it.
Yeah. But Hauptmann never admitted it, did he?
No, he didn't, no.
He died just
And his
the
wife
other day.
didn't either, yeah. But there was circumstantial evidence they couldn't find. They even found money in his garage.
Oh. Well, do you remember your first radio?
Yes, I remember I used to be a radio fan, and we had to get a radio in those days. We had to make our own. So there were circuits that were sent up, and you'd buy parts and assemble a radio. And I got a little one up in the attic that I made myself, and we used. But I remember how we used to huddle around the radio and see how far we could get. And we used to reach out to Philadelphia at times and reach to Los Angeles occasionally. And a good deal of our listening was built on seeing how far we could reach. And the daytime reception was never as long as the night. But I made many radios as the technique progressed.
It started out with a crystal set, wasn't
Yes,
it?
yeah. It started out with a crystal set, yeah.
Do you remember some of the early programs?
Well, not too much, but I remember one of the first people on the air was the University of Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
I took physics under Professor, I've forgotten his name just a moment. He used to live up the street here on Chadbourn Avenue. And he was in charge of physics, and he made his own radio tubes. And he finally set up a broadcasting station at the university. And he had with him a young fellow known as Malcolm Hansen. And he'd been down to the South Pole and was an expert in telegraphy and communications, short wave. When I used to listen short wave, and I remember one time hearing a station in Stoughton broadcast, and then hearing Malcolm Hansen come on the air and try to determine where the interference was coming from. But those were the kind of things you ran across back in the early days of radio. You used a headset and earphones and so on. And then later you got over the whisker stage of crystal and moved into the tube area. And then that moved in later into the solid state where you don't have tubes. So that's the way the whole radio business progressed. But I was a kind of a hobbyist in radio that way.
Well, you probably heard Amos and Andy, and
Beg pardon?
you heard Amos and Andy.
Oh,
way
yes.
back then?
Yes, they were common on the air. Yeah. And there were a number of pretty programs everyone listened to there.
And you always went to movies quite a bit.
Yes, yeah,
then.
we saw lots of movies there.
At first they were silents,
Yeah.
weren't they?
Yeah, some of them were silent, yeah. They were silent, yeah. They'd have the recording there.
Did you go to university plays?
Yes, but there weren't so many at that time, and the union wasn't up at the time I was in the university. But as soon as it was, I became a life member of the union there. So I still go there to some of their travel shows, and Mr. Adler here goes with me there.
Good.
And they have a nice series every year of travel in foreign countries. But they're reminders of many of the foreign countries I visited, because I spent my vacation in Europe every time we had a meeting over there, and I'd spend as much as a month or 2 months over there before we came home. My wife went with me on a number of those visits and occasions. So I visited Norway and France and Italy and Sweden and Denmark and Germany and Spain and Portugal.
You went by ship, I
Yes,
suppose.
I went by ship many times, but by American ships. I never traveled on one of the Queens, but as an American here, I traveled American ships, and the SS United States is the one I traveled on the most. which was the fastest ship on the seas at the time, and quite a wonderful ship. But I remember visiting Norway the first time in the early 1939, I think it was. And I happened to get there on the 7th of May, which was their National Independence Day. And it was a revelation to see the enthusiasm of the Norwegians on their Revelation Day. They have parades all morning of the school children and parades all afternoon of the working people. So it's a big day of celebration. And I remember I had a movie and took moving pictures of the parade. And I stood there beside the passing parade with a Norwegian flag on one shoulder and an American flag on the other. And the kids, as they went by waving their flags, everybody waved and saluted me. And I got some of the wonderful pictures there of the incident. But the country was then, I knew, was getting ready to be invaded by the Germans there. So it was one of the wonderful experiences I had. And I never forgotten it, and I even took time to write a poem about Norway, which says, in part, Norway, land where friendly people dwell, by hardy nature templed well. Welcome is the stranger here, free of action, free of fear. History tells 10 centuries past how Viking grazed by war and mass, not only England, or not only America didn't verdant, but also America's verdant shores. At Big Dust Museum every day, Viking ships are on display, with wide steerboard and graceful prow, discovered near the Oslo fjord.
Very good. You write as
well.
well.
I wrote a whole poem, but that's just the introduction to it here.
Oh, well, that's excellent. So, well, did it take you about a week to cross the?
Yes, about the SS United States crossed in 4.5 days.
Oh,
The other days took 6 days about.
So you'd go by train from here to New York?
Yeah, from train to New York, And then I used, 3 different times I used a car to get around Europe.
Oh.
I bought a car twice and rented one once. So after my meetings, I took vacation and drove all around the rest of Europe there.
Did you enjoy the crossing on the ship?
Oh yes, the ship's food is wonderful and the atmosphere is great. Yeah, it's a great experience you can't have anymore. But the Queens do run yet. You can still get passage. There's a Rotary convention in England this year, and some of the ships are running over there now. But they're quite expensive compared to what they used to be.
I wanted to ask you...
I remember going over by air the first time, and that was in World War II. We had a mission from the Forest Products Laboratory to England to exchange information with them on wood. And I was included in our 5-member delegation with Director Winslow of the laboratory. I knew all the directors of the laboratory and worked under them up to that time. And we had wonderful meetings with the British over there, and we stayed at the Claridge Hotel. And then we had dinners with some of the people, and a few times some air raids had taken place when we were in a meeting, and we didn't even know it. But the British planes would take off in the very early morning and then all come back. They used the Mosquito bomber that was an entirely wood plane, and one of the best wood planes, and it was faster than any of the other planes because its skin was made of smooth plywood and it didn't have any rivets or obtrusions to obstruct the flow of air. And when I was over there, we had a chance to have a ride at the de Havilland factory in one of the mosquito bombers. So that was part of our mission. And we could have come home on one of the Queens, but we chose to fly home.
Oh.
And one of the airplane companies had the amphibious planes at that time. So we left England and went to Scotland or to Ireland, and stayed at Shannon for a little while, and then went to Portugal, and then we went to Dakar in Africa. Then we crossed the Atlantic over to Natal in Brazil, and then we flew up to the Amazon at Belém, and then flew to Port-au-Prince Island, and then back to the United States here. But it was a wonderful experience there.
Oh, must have been a thrill.
We had engine trouble when we were in Africa, so we were stranded there for 2 or 3 days. And we had a chance to see quite a little bit of their occupation there.
Sounds exciting.
Well, those are just a few of the things that...
What about the Depression? Did that affect the Depression in Madison?
The which?
Depression in 30s.
Yes,
30s.
it was, but it wasn't so deep as in Madison as in other places. And many people really weren't affected as much with all the government employment there is in the city and all. So it was a serious thing, but a little less in Madison than it might have been elsewhere.
Did you have the hobos coming to the door? Did you have hobos?
No, I never experienced any of them.
Yeah.
And we're in an
Still
awful
an
good
awful
neighborhood here. We never have any vandalism, never any trouble of any kind. The neighbors are all very close. But I remember when we came here, there weren't any houses hardly on the hill. Professor Skinner had a house up on Lathrop Street up there, but there was hardly any houses back on the hill here. That's why Professor Skinner's high school out there was way out in the country. There used to be a windmill on one of the houses up there on the hill back in the old days there.
Well, quite a few professors lived up in University Heights, didn't they?
A few of them, like Professor Skinner and so on. We're in University Heights, just not far from here. Some of them lived over on Jefferson Street and over in the... And Dean Millar lived on Grant Street.
Oh.
And his home is still there.
Did you used to go over to the parks, to Wingra Park?
Yes, we used to visit the parks quite often there, yes. But we loved the lakes here, and we often went out on the lakes. I had a boat, and we did fishing on the lakes.
Oh.
And so on.
What kind of boat?
Boat? Well, just an ordinary 16-foot boat with 3 seat.
A rowboat?
Yeah, rowboat,
Right.
yeah. But I had an outboard on.
Oh, Where did you keep it?
Well, I kept it at Shorewood Marina.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they let me store a boat there, even though I wasn't a resident. And then when the centennial year came along, I knew it was something unusual, and I tried to think of something I might do. So I wrote a centennial booklet on the Indian mounds at Black Hawk Country Club. And because of that publicity and some effort on our part, we were able to get through the State Historical Society to get the Indian mounds established on the National Register of Historic Places. And that details of that are covered in that other bulletin that I gave you there.
How did you get interested in Indian mounds?
Well, just by accident at the Black Hawk Country Club. The Indian mounds stripped all across the southern part of the state, and there are literally thousands of them. But out at Black Hawk Country Club, we have a few of the most unusual. One of the unusual mounds is the goose. And the founders of the Black Hawk Country Club knew about the Indian background, so every hole was named after an Indian event. And one hole was named the Goose. It's one where the goose had a 45-foot wingspread and a neck 108 feet long. And it's still out there.
Is it there?
And I put a plaque on it, describe it. And it was partly damaged when one of the greenkeepers spilled a tea that covered it. So I arranged to have that uncovered and restored to its original position through cooperation with the State Historical Society. Now it's back in its original shape there. And then we have a big panther mound with a tail nearly 100 foot long right across the road there. And we have 3 Bears Indian mounds. And we have 2 conical burial mounds and 2 lineal burial mounds out there. And those I described here and yes, in my booklet.
Were you involved in getting the country club started?
Well, in a way, yes. I'm the only charter member left of the country club. So I've been an honorary member and honorary president for many, many years.
When was it started?
But I knew the founders of the club in 1921 and 22. And Professor Matthews was one of the early founders. And he told me many times of the details of how it got started. And I only wished I'd had a recorder like this so I could have made a record of how that club,
you probably
the details
remember.
of the club. They tried to start one at Tacoma, and a large part of the group backed off and then decided to put one up here at Black Hawk. So it used to be a private property, but during the Depression, they couldn't meet the obligations, and the city of Shorewood Hills took it over. So it now belongs to the city of Shorewood Hills, and the Black Hawk Country Club rents it from the city of Shorewood Hills.
Were you you played golf?
Yes, I've played golf. I used to love to play tennis, but I knew I couldn't play that all my life. So in 1921, I started playing golf and joined the club out here, and all the other friends I knew have passed away, so I'm the only charter member left of the club to help carry on.
Did you and your wife go out to eat various places?
Well, yes, it did, but not as common as it is now.
I just wondered where you went in the
we-
early days.
Yes, we used to go out, but more often we'd have dinners in the homes and go around to the homes. We'd always have Christmas dinner here with all of the relatives and so on her side of the family. So there wasn't as much outside dining, nearly as much as there is now. It wasn't so common. Bernie and I go out to dinner here quite often together here. And one of the places he loves to go is out to Spring Green there, because they have the best fish fries there of any place.
They do. Well, do you remember some of the places you used to go, early restaurants?
The early dining places? Well,
The Hummer Hotel.
I can't remember too many of them, but one place we dined at more than any other was down to Memorial Union.
Oh, Did you ever go to the Simon House?
Oh, yes. When I was in university, I went to Simon House.
Yeah.
We used to get dinners for 25 cents all you could eat, and we could get tickets for a week there. So when we were students, we'd often get Simon House tickets. That was a wonderful eating place there. Yes, we never forgot that. And but I over the years we used to go to some of the places, but not as often as we do now.
Well, was when you played cards, was it mainly bridge, or did you have
Bridge,
other
yeah,
games?
we always played
You always
bridge,
played
yeah.
bridge.
We had a group of laboratory people,
Oh.
and I think there's only 3 of us left here now out of a group of 12. So we used to have 3 tables all the time. We'd always have a big New Year's dinner together and a Thanksgiving dinner. So we had a lot of socialization that way.
Who were some of the other directors of the Forest Products Laboratory?
The others who I want?
Directors.
Directors? Oh, I knew all of them. McGarvey Klein was the first one. And then he was followed by Howard Weiss.
Oh.
And then he was followed by C.P. Winslow, who was one of my very, very best friends. And then following that, George Hunt was the director for a while. And then Al Hall was director for a little while, and Ed Locke. And I served under all of those directors, and I was always glad I wasn't the director, because I wasn't vulnerable at all, and I could stay there and travel. And I became a member of the American Society for Testing Materials and helped establish standards on testing and methods and procedures and specifications for products. And I was president of the American Society there for in 1950-51. I was on the board of directors for 5 years. So that's the national recognition we had here in carrying on the work.
That's a federally run group, isn't it?
The laboratory is
Yeah.
a federal organization under the Department of Agriculture, and it's a branch of the Forest Service. But the American Society for Testing Materials is a private organization. And when I left and retired from my work at Forest Products, I carried on consulting work for many, many years. There's a tremendous demand for services of that kind for anyone experienced in the wood field. So I served in that capacity quite a bit here.
I heard that you, besides bowling, that you like to go out to Las Vegas.
Yeah, I do. That's one of my current activities here. Since my wife passed away 10 years ago, I'm here all alone, so I enjoy a little recreation out of town. So I go, every winter I go out to Sun City, Arizona.
Oh.
We used to go to Florida, my wife and I.
Did you?
But Florida gets so crowded and the prices go up and up. But out at Sun City, we have perfect weather. I was out there 2 months this year. We didn't have a drop of rain, and the weather was all perfect, sunny every day, and wonderful. And then I went to California and visited some relatives, and I took my favorite drive down the coast from down the coast to San Diego. And you drive right along the ocean and come to La Jolla and see the coals there. It's just a wonderful place. Then you go over to Coronado Island and see the Del Coronado Hotel. They had 12 conventions on there when I stopped this year. It's a tremendous convention place. So I attended many conventions when I was going. But when I was doing consulting work, I did some work with the American Institute of Timber Construction, which is the organization that produces all these glued laminated ushers, which we developed at the laboratory, used in church architecture and large open spaces and all of that. So for many years after I left the laboratory, I was chairman of their technical advisory committee that acted on changes in their rules and regulations and things like that. And then they made me an honorary member of the society when I retired. So I'm an honorary member of the American Society of Civil Engineers, a honorary member of the American Society for Testing Materials, and I belong to the Forest Products Research Society.
Well, so you've enjoyed living in Madison.
Oh, it's been a wonderful place, and I've never been able to get away. And it took me over, and I've been here ever since. It's been a wonderful place.
It's getting,
Well-
getting pretty big now.
Yes, it's getting bigger and bigger here, but I still enjoy it. I'm glad I can still drive a car and drive around and visit and see things here. So I never have a dull moment.
That's very remarkable.
Yep.
Well,
Well, I'm glad I've had a lot of travel and so on. And then finally they got caught up with me and they got me in Who's Who in America and Who's Who in the World and distinguished people all over and so on. Well, that's the way I wound up.
I see you have many awards here.
There's many awards and memorabilia there. American Society for Testing Materials. The university here gave me a citation back in 1951 in recognizing some of the achievements of some of their graduates. So I was honored by being given this citation by the university.
And you've liked this neighborhood, I guess.
Oh yes, it's been a wonderful neighborhood too. Yeah, it couldn't have been better. Things, if I had it to do all over, I couldn't have done anything any better. But I have this lovely collection from my brother-in-law here that I have to show. He was quite an artist. You might want to look at that before you go.
I'll do that. Well, I certainly do appreciate this. I'm afraid our tape is running out, but
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it very much,
Well-
and I will certainly put your booklets.
Well, you're welcome.
In with
It's
the
a
tape.
pleasure, but I've
Uh-huh.
only started here. I could start entertaining you here for
I'm sure
forever.
you could put on a real show
Yeah.
for us. Well, that's marvelous that you.
I still go over to my high school